So, let's talk about Soul Hackers 2. Soul Hackers 2 is kind of an important release for me because it's the game that inspired me to do the entire Shin Megami Tensei retrospective and really kick off retrospectives in general for me as I work on the next one. However, with the release and the opportunity to get a code, I did want to take a look, and I wanted to see how the game actually turned out, even though I have no experience with the Devil Summoner series before this point. I basically wanted to see if it had the potential to draw in a new audience in the same way as Shin Megami Tensei 5 or Persona 5. And I'm not sure. Obviously right now, from what I can tell, the game isn't selling fantastically. It's doing alright, but it's not a huge hit in the same way as those other games, and it's just not getting talked about much. Now, a lot of that might be due to the fact that there's just so much coming out right now, especially RPGs, and other games are just taking up the conversation, with Soul Hackers not really getting a chance to stand out. And that's not entirely undeserved, because if you know Shin Megami Tensei, it basically is another Shin Megami Tensei game, much more in line with classic SMT than the Persona series, as there's no like school life or time to keep. It tends to be a shorter game. You wouldn't take, doing everything, maybe 60, 70 hours. If you fly through the story, easily 30 to 40. It's not that long, which makes it pretty great as an RPG to just go through and take your own pace and not really get tied up too much with it. But I think the other thing with it is it's just very standard when it comes to SMT, and that's not a bad thing. If you know what you want, if you know what you like, this works. That fulfills everything you'd want from an SMT game, especially if you're not into the whole Persona aesthetic. This is very much an adult SMT. It deals with adult scenarios, adult lives. It's not about teenagers, and it still carries that forward. And I think in that way, the world is fascinating. Learning about devil summoners, learning how the world has stagnated really, and what that means for the world is fascinating, even if it doesn't really get into it that much. But let's talk about that story, because it's fine, but where it stands out, I think, is the characters, specifically Ringo. Ringo is fantastic. You see all the promotional material, and she seems kind of low-key, standard, ethereal, nothing too crazy, but she is just a little gremlin in a lot of ways. She picks at people, she picks at the other party members, she defies orders a lot. She's just sort of mischievous in this way that's a lot of fun and makes her stand out as a protagonist. She is great in this game and is by far the standout for me. The other standout is Saizo and his storyline, how devoted he is to a certain character, and just his outlook. There's something fun about him, even though he seems like he'd be kind of the evil betrayer because of the sharp teeth and design, but it works. He's fun, he's lively, and he has some great interactions with the other characters, and yet when you get to the heart of the matter for a lot of his stuff, it really does kick in, and you kind of feel for the guy. And I think those characters are really where it stands out. The other two party members, Arrow and Melody, they're fine. They're kind of standard. There's nothing wrong with them, but it just Ringo and Saizo stand out. And as far as the actual story, it's really kept very simple, where the overall goal is that a massive AI network called Ion has used its prowess to see that humanity is heading towards the apocalypse, and they want to put an end to that and not let the world end. So it creates parts of itself as human AI. They are completely human, but they have hookups to Ion that allow them to see a bit more. So they're sort of the best of both worlds, and it's them learning to be human that kind of allows you to learn more about this world. And that, of course, is with Ringo and her kind of sister Fig. And Fig is more of a support role. Think of it like Futaba in Persona 5. And it definitely plays more of a background role. And they're setting out to stop this end of the world, whether that might be. And they track it to the character of Arrow, who somehow his death is what kind of kicks this whole thing off. And so Ringo goes to it and finds Arrow, but he's already dead. And she uses an ability she has called soul hacking, which allows her to get into his mind, his soul, and offers him the chance at a second chance. He takes it, revives, and all of a sudden his abilities are kind of tied to hers. And the same process happens with the other two of Melody and Saizo, where they're both dead before she can get to them, but she soul hacks them, and they have enough will to live again to solve the issues and stop this end of the world, that they all kind of join up, even though they're kind of all on opposite sides. But they all have their own reasons for working together, even though it's kind of tenuous at first, which makes for an interesting setup. Basically what it comes down to is that there's this faction called the Phantom Society, made up of devil summoners who want to bring about the end of the world. They want to cleanse it and they want to start over. And it's led by this guy named Iron Mask, who is collecting these essences called covenants. And there are 5 covenants in the world, and they just naturally increase abilities. Collect all 5 though, and you can summon a great god in order to reset the world, and that is his goal. So it's a race to get the covenants from the people that hold them, or at least protect them, because the only way to get a covenant is the person dying. So it leads into that, where it's very basic, where you know who has the covenants. You're trying to track them down to protect them. Inevitably, you probably don't protect them, but then you learn where the next stop is, and you're just trying to stop Iron Mask throughout the entire game until it just picks up and you learn more about the backstories and what it all means. And the plot is honestly very simple. It does the job, but it's the character interactions that I think really does a lot. And you get some of it in the main story. I think you get enough that you can get a feel for the characters, but it also feels a little shallow in that point. And that's where the Soul Matrix comes in, which is kind of like a Mementos type idea, as in Persona 5, where it's just a big old dungeon that you explore, and it gives you a lot of extra stuff to do as far as dungeon exploration is concerned. And the Soul Matrix, while I do have my issues, it is cool to be able to go into basically the histories, the memories of the 3 other characters, and learn more about them while simultaneously unlocking abilities that make them even better in battle, and taking on new demons, unlocking new demons, and even forming these bonds with the others thanks to choices or hangouts or what have you. And that even helps Ringo to become stronger. So I like how they take the character development and make it more side questy in order to allow for extra dungeons and to unlock extra abilities. There's a reason to do these beyond just, I want to learn more about the characters, which is enough for some people, but others might want a little bit more. However, the Soul Matrix does get kind of grindy, and that's kind of where the biggest issue of Soul Hackers comes into play, because the dungeons are so boring, at least from a design standpoint. The first dungeon is just getting you all set to go and get an idea of how the game plays, so it's kind of small, but it's still just a rainy dock. The next one is an abandoned subway line. The third one is another abandoned subway line. The fourth one is an abandoned hotel, and it just goes like this, where it's just none of these locations are interesting to look at. And they keep it with the same boxy outlook that you'd expect from a classic dungeon design. It's a throwback in that way, where you can almost imagine it being explored in first person and doing the twist and having it sort of the repeating textures. The crazy thing though is none of the dungeons are randomized. They're all set in place because they do ask you to be explored, and there's a ton of side quests where you've got to go back to specific areas within the dungeons, thanks to there's fast travel within them that makes it a little easier, and you can't randomize them because of that, because there are specific places you need to go to, and yet because even though they're not randomized, they're extremely rote and similar and just boring, and that's a shame. I feel like, especially after Persona 5, how they took the idea of standard dungeons and really did something with them. And granted, you can get wild with Persona 5 because it's in another world and you're representing other things, But there had to be something you could do. Like, there's a few puzzles that do come in with the later dungeons, but until you get to those later dungeons, there's really not that much to change up the gameplay. You're just running through them and fighting demons, and there you go. Now, that's not to say there aren't good ideas within these dungeons, because a lot of it comes down to the demons you have. A great idea here is that a lot of what you do in a dungeon for other RPGs is handled by demons. You want to find chests to get items. You don't find chests in here. Your demons are sent out into the dungeon and they find the stuff. And when you talk to them, they're like, oh, here's an item you can have. Here's health recharge. Hey, I talked to this demon and they want to join up with you. And you talk to the demon and they'll say like, hey, give me money, give me an item, give me some of your health or MP. And you give it to them and you get them as a demon. There's no talking involved. It's all about your demons inviting other demons to join you. It's simplified in that way, and it's given sort of a realistic context, which works and is interesting, but it's just the dungeons themselves are just so boring to look at. And the Soul Matrix is by far the worst one because it's just a digital space. Cubes everywhere. You're in the PlayStation 2 load up screen. It's really what it comes down to. It's just so dull, which is a shame because the rest of the city, the other places you visit, do have a nice style to them. They're not very large, but you get to see the city street, you get to see the people interacting. It's all kept very simple, which is surprising considering the game looks great, but it doesn't seem like it's that far off that you couldn't put this game on the Switch. Maybe I'm missing something. Obviously, we'd have to see a bit of a downgrade for certain things, but the dungeon designs, the size of areas, this doesn't seem like it would be difficult for the Switch to handle. Now, granted, there could be a lot of load times, and that comes to some other issues I had with the game, at least until they did a patch on day one, because I did get a pre-release code and just was playing it up before that point, where the camera was far too close to Ringo. I started playing and I actually felt a little motion sick. Now, I did get used to it, but it was just right there, right behind Ringo. It just felt far too close. And thankfully, there is now an option that allows you to pull the camera back and set it to a space that feels a little bit more natural for yourself. The other one was the load times, which I'm playing off the PS5 version. The load time should be non-existent, and yet they felt like they were taking forever, and it got so dull. But I found out later that it's because there's tips. It offers you backgrounds on the story, offers you backgrounds on the characters, some of the factions and stuff like that, which is helpful getting you accustomed to everything when you first start out, but of course you don't really need to read it after a certain point. There's an option that allows you to either choose when they go off yourself or get rid of them completely, and when you do that, the loading is instantaneous, but there's nothing in the game that tells you about this. You have to find it yourself, and certainly improves it, but man, it sucks when you don't know about that. So I had to learn that one myself. As far as the rest of the gameplay, again, a lot of it's connected to demons. You have the demons you can recruit, and then of course you can later fuse them to make even more powerful demons, and so forth. All the stuff you'd expect is in there, but there are some twists on how it's handled. The big one is in battle, where rather than the turn break system or all-out attacks, it uses something called stacking and sabbaths. So basically, every time you hit a enemy's weakness, you have a stack. And the more weaknesses you hit, the bigger the stack becomes, and the greater the extra damage is. So basically, it's a all-out attack by your demons. And it can get that little extra damage done, so you hit all the enemies, it ignores all the weakness, all the resistances or reflections or what have you. If one demon is completely negating everything you can throw against it, but another one is weak to a bunch of stuff, you can hit that other demon and the Sabbath will hit both and still do damage to that second one. So it's convenient in that way, and there's great ways that you can kind of build off of that, thanks to special orders that Ringo can eventually give. Like, every Sabbath is worth double, so the more Sabbath you have there, it does more. There's others where all the stacks you get can be focused on one enemy. You hit that one enemy for much greater damage, and you can just really lay into them if there's a certain character giving you a lot of trouble. But there has to be enough turns that go past for them to recharge. You can't use it every turn, which keeps things interesting. The other aspect of it is with demons learning abilities. After they learn all of them, they offer up an item, and these can be beads or other healing items, or, more importantly, mystiques. And the mystiques can be equipped to your summoners, which increase their affinity with the different elements. And you can then go to the gunsmith, which you only have one standard weapon, but if by going to the gunsmith, you can increase its attack, you can add new abilities, all kinds of different things that just really loads it up. And you just need to find enough materials, and you can see what materials, where you get materials, what enemies you get it from, and where they're located, so you can really go through and upgrade everything. And money is plentiful in this game, which is good because a lot of things are pretty expensive, so the economy kind of works out, and it creates this loop of me wanting to max out every demon so I can get their stuff, and then I can fuse them even further and just get as much as I want. It's the classic SMT loop with a few twists, and it works really well, and it's still super addictive. And if that's what you're looking for, you will absolutely get it here with Soul Hackers 2. There's a lot to see, a lot to do, and it's a good amount of fun. I do recommend the game, even though standard is what I keep coming back to. It's good, but it's not that different from what you'd expect. This is a low-key, fun RPG that doesn't take up too much of your time, has a decent amount of replay value, especially if you want to do everything. There are two endings, normal ending and true ending, that tie into the soul matrix, so if you want to get the true ending, you got to do certain things in there. I really enjoyed it, but I also didn't feel like it was anything special. It was just good, really good, but it didn't have that spark that really brought me in. There's some harrowing stuff, there's some great characters, I think that's where it really got me, and the stacks and the strategies for that really paid off, where there can be some tough fights, but it never seems impossible. I never felt like I really had to grind for anything, and I appreciated that aspect. Again, if you're looking for just another SMT game, maybe something a little easier to get into, or just wanted something to hold you over until a future release, this is a great game. Again, Ringo is a standout character. I really do enjoy her. And the story does pick up quite a bit by the end. It's just the locations are kind of small, and the dungeons themselves are just kind of boring to look at. But as far as the actual combat and the gameplay loop, it's as addictive as ever. It's what you'd expect from Shin Megami Tensei. Whether or not that's for you, well, it's hard to say, but I think it's worth a look if you have any interest at all. I did ultimately enjoy the game and would recommend it as an RPG, but I think you have to be in a certain mood to get into this one. It's not grand like Xenoblade 3, it's not different like Live Alive, it's just a solid game that's maybe worth checking out. So that's my thoughts on Soul Hackers 2. No regrets dedicating all that time to a Shin Megami Tensei retrospective. Honestly, it gave me a lot of background information, so I understood more of the references. Again, you don't need to know the backstory of any Devil Summoner game to get Soul Hackers 2. There's just a bunch of references to the old games that you might get and go, aha, I see. Nothing beyond that though. But hey, I at least got those moments thanks to that retrospective. And if you want to check it out, I'll have a link right to it so you can do that. But otherwise, let me know if you picked up Soul Hackers 2 and what you've thought of it so far, whether you've beaten it or just played a little bit so far. So thank you once again for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to Good Vibes Gaming for more SMT content might come up in the future, more retrospectives, and whatever fun things we can come up with as far as video content. We also have a Patreon you can support over at patreon.com/gvgaming, where you can get all kinds of extra goodies as well. So thank you so much, and until next time, bye.